let's start with the heel turner news. So the report is that what's on the table from the Lakers already is Russell Westbrook plus a first-round draft pick in return for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. So obviously there's a lot of debate as to whether or not Buddy Hield and Miles Turner are worth the first-round picks and so on and so forth. We don't need to get too far into the leverage elements of it because I've gone over it with you guys so many times. But I think the reality is when you're taking Russell Westbrook, who, as we've talked about so often on this show, is a guy that I'm not sure that that any team in the NBA would sign if he was available for a veteran minimum, right? That's the type of situation that his value is in right now. But at the same time, he's also making $47 million, and chances are, as a process of the team taking on his salary, they're also going to have to send him home or direct him somewhere else. It's a very, very complicated situation. So you can't look at it straight up as, is Buddy Hield worth a first-round pick? Or is Miles Turner worth a first-round pick? Or are the two of them worth 2 first-round picks? That's not the exchange that's taking place here. It's Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, and they're dealing with the Russ problem for you. And so you're paying on 2 fronts. You're paying for the value of the players in return, and you're paying to send Russ out, obviously. Now, to be clear, kind of like what happened with the Kawhi Leonard situation the year that the Lakers won the title, I still think Kyrie should be their top priority. We've talked about this on previous episodes. The reality of the situation is guys like Kyrie, what they do is very difficult to replicate on any level. It is a superpower, essentially. And everyone else is kind of a regular human, right? And there's like a dozen or, maybe 24 players in the league that have these like legit superpowers that there's no scheming or effort or anything that can be done to counter what they bring to a basketball team. And so it's a lot easier to take Kyrie Irving and unleash his superpower and then manufacture a facsimile of what Miles Turner does than it is to bring in Buddy Hield and Miles Turner and go to Buddy Hield and be like, I need you to create shots in a playoff series the way that Kyrie Irving does. That's just not realistic, right? So Kyrie needs to be the number one option. But if they have some sort of intel or some sort of understanding that Kyrie is off the table, this is a great backup plan. If you would have told me coming into this summer that the Lakers could flip Russell Westbrook into 2 quality starter-level NBA players, I wouldn't have believed you. I thought it was more realistic that the Lakers would get kind of like other bad contracts and maybe if they were fortunate, one solid player. Like I was looking at maybe, okay, they could get Gordon Hayward as salary filler and then maybe they could get Terry Rozier. That's like a really solid guard. So you get one solid piece and then the rest might be like Mason Plumlee or Gordon Hayward, kind of like just salary filler type of pieces. The idea of getting 2 functional NBA starters in return, that does so much to erase the damage of the Russell Westbrook trade. I've said this before on the show, but Russell Westbrook is not responsible for what happened to the Lakers last year. That's not fair to him. But the Russell Westbrook trade is absolutely what caused the Lakers season to go the way that it did last year, beyond the injuries, which obviously were out of everybody's control. But if you look at it, even in the previous season, LeBron and Anthony Davis missed a ton of time. The roster was still functional enough to carry them to the playoffs in the way that this year's wasn't. It wasn't just Russ coming in. And we don't need to get into the things that Russ does on a basketball team that can be damaging. But it was Russ coming in, and it was Kentavious Caldwell-Pope going out, a starting level NBA 2 guard, right? It was Kyle Kuzma going out, a starting NBA level 4, 3-4 wing forward, whatever you want to call him, that type of player. Montrezl Harrell, is what he is as a bench big. But also, in that deal, the Lakers took in more salary, considerably more salary in Russ's contract. And as a result, when the Lakers came to look at the final numbers of the finances, they decided they couldn't afford Alex Caruso. So in my opinion, you have to partially factor in the loss of Alex Caruso as a side effect or collateral damage from the Russell Westbrook trade. So that trade is what decimated the roster. And last year, when LeBron James and Anthony Davis went down, they struggled so bad because they didn't even have NBA level players on the roster, NBA level starters. We've talked about this before. Under roster control, I really like Austin Reeves. I like Stanley Johnson. I like Juan Toscano-Anderson and Troy Brown Jr. and all of these guys, but they're not starting level NBA players. They're bench players that will have to play bigger roles on this team because of the lack of talent. So obviously it's expensive, but fixing your mistakes is expensive. I had a weird thing happen with the gate at the complex that my wife and I live in right now, and it like knocked off the side mirror of my truck. And I was kind of impatient as I was going through the gate, and bam, it was a mistake. And the mistake cost me a few $100. It sucks, but it is what it is. That's what I had to pay to undo the damage that I did to my truck. I was able to install it. It was easy. It wasn't a big deal, but it cost me money, right? You screwed up. You made a really bad deal. It hurt your team. The price to fix the problem is 2 first-round picks. In the after, it's not the same players as KCP and Kyle Kuzma and Alex Caruso, but it's starter-level NBA players. Say what you want about Buddy Hield. He's a starting-level NBA guard. Say what you want about Miles Turner. He's a starting-level NBA center. Here's why that's important. The core philosophy of the Lakers has always been LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and role players, guys that do the dirty work. Where things went off the rails last year was losing the quality role players. It was LeBron James, Anthony Davis, the shell of Russell Westbrook, and poor role players. So if you can get quality role players back into the mix, you can recapture the formula from 2020. In 2020 and 2021, the Lakers won almost 80% of their games when LeBron James and Anthony Davis were on the floor, healthy, playing basketball. That is what happens when you surround them with quality role players. When Miles Turner is on the Pacers, he has to do so much more. When Buddy Hield is on the Kings or on the Pacers, he has to do so much more to contribute to the team. When they are playing behind Anthony Davis and LeBron James, their roles shrink way down. And when their roles shrink down, it allows them to focus their talents into it. They can focus their exceptional talents, Buddy Hield as a shooter and as a guy who can create shots off the dribble, and Miles Turner as a shot blocker who can also space the floor, roll hard to the rim, and the things that he can do. When you take their elite skills and take away all the extra stuff they have to do and allow them to focus their elite skills, they can be very effective basketball players. So I like that as a backup plan. In terms of the X's and O's, there's a couple of things that stand out to me. We're going to talk more about 5-out basketball later in the show. Like I said, Miles Turner is a textbook 5-out center. He gives you the ability to pick and pop to the 3-point line. He can also spot up and attack closeouts, right? Him and Anthony Davis can even play together and play 5-out basketball, which is a super interesting concept that we can get into further later into the show. With Buddy Hield, what excites me the most with him, and the same principle takes place with Kyrie Irving, but it's also exciting with Buddy Hield as a backup option, the ability to shoot the ball off the dribble while also being a small, quick player that does not lend teams to be willing to switch their big man out onto them. So when LeBron James and Anthony Davis run high screen and roll, chances are LeBron's going to be being guarded by a big, versatile defensive forward, and Anthony Davis is going to be guarded by a big, versatile defensive forward, right? That's just the way that it's going to work. So chances are any team, if LeBron and Anthony Davis run pick and roll, they're going to switch it. And now you're pulling the ball out and running isolation, and it doesn't really accomplish much. That's the issue of that specific action with those two players. Now, when you add a Kyrie Irving or a Buddy Hield in this case, they can't switch because Buddy's too quick, Anthony Davis is too big, Miles Turner's too big, right? Now they have to run some variation of drop coverage. If they run drop coverage, Buddy Hield uniquely forces you to chase over the top of screens. When they had Russell Westbrook, Dennis Schroeder, Rajon Rondo, because they couldn't shoot off the dribble, the guard had the flexibility to go underneath the screen. When the guard can go underneath the screen, he doesn't have to worry about the drive as much, which allows the big man, the screen defender, to stay back and take away the roll man. So by making the roll man's job easier and by making the guard's job easier, you can run a drop coverage that is damned effective against good basketball players. For instance, you guys remember the Thunder beating the Lakers twice this year. One of the big reasons why they were able to do that was towards the end of the game, the Lakers tried to go to Russ Anthony Davis pick and roll, but they had Lou Dort on Russ, and they had, I'm blanking on his name, but the backup big that used to play for the Jazz a few years ago, I'm forgetting his name, but the guy who was playing big for the Thunder last year on Anthony Davis. And when Russ came over the ball screen, Dort just dropped underneath the screen, and it's killing me that I can't remember his name, but the big man would drop back, and it turned Russ and Anthony Davis into jump shooters. They're both bad jump shooters. The results were they ended up losing to the Oklahoma City Thunder twice. That's what happens when you can run that super aggressive, conservative, back to the rim drop against Russ and Anthony Davis. When you make the guard chase over the top because of your shooting threat, Because if Buddy Hield, if you go under that screen, he's knocking down that three probably 45% of the time if he's open off the dribble. That forces you to chase over the top. If you chase over the top, now the guard is in a disadvantage as Buddy Hield is going downhill. Now the screen defender has to step over to contain Buddy Hield. Now Anthony Davis is rolling hard to the rim. That's what opens up the pocket pass or forces the help defender to come over so you can swing for open threes on the weak side of the floor. It's a simple concept. It's not very complicated, but it makes a huge difference in how difficult it is to guard your pick and roll action. So I love the idea of the Lakers getting a real ball handling, aggressive pull-up shooter in that guard position, and I think Buddy Hield's a great fit there. So again, the Lakers are smart to hold the first pick and hold out on the second pick until they absolutely have to. They should still be prioritizing Kyrie, but as a decent backup option, I like the Hield-Turner fit, and if it costs 2 picks, it costs 2 picks. That's what it costs to fix the mistake that you made. All right, let's move on to the Warriors for a second. So Michael Thompson, Klay Thompson's father, said, quote, "They won't be complacent. You've got 3 competitors leading the way in Draymond, Steph, and Klay. They've got 4, but you know they want to get 5. They want to get 6. So the question here is, how many more titles do I believe that the Warriors will win? So first of all, I do want to talk about the motivation part because I do find it interesting. You know, I used to work in real estate. Colin Cowherd used to have this one-liner that he'd use in a show. I'm sure he's been using it still to this day. But he says, like, you know, with a real estate agent, any real estate agent can have one great year. You have a bunch of deals fall in your lap. You're motivated. You're working hard. Your pipeline gets full. You have a bunch of stuff closed. You make a ton of money, right? But the truly great realtors are good year in and year out, you know? One of the things that I learned early on in that business was like the difference between your pipeline and the deals that you're actually working, because there's transactional work as a realtor, and then there's the actual lead generation, you know, doing open houses, cold calling, door knocking, whatever it was that you did. Some realtors even pay for leads from the larger companies around. But what'll happen a lot with realtors is they'll fill their pipeline and then they'll start closing a bunch of deals. And when they're closing the deals, they start making a lot of money. But they're doing this transactional stuff and they're not filling the pipeline. So then like you get to the end and the deals all close and you've made all this money, but then your pipeline's empty. And then you can go 6 months without closing another deal because you didn't continue to fill the pipeline along the way. And you see that a lot in professional sports. You see it a lot with specific types of athletes, right? You have guys that are, you know, competitive, guys that are very competitive, and then you have guys that are psychotically competitive. You see teams and players where it's like 1 year they're completely locked in and everything is working and you could tell the motivation is on level 10 out of 10, but then the next season it's just not quite the same. James Harden's my favorite example of this. If you look at the 2018 season, the year that he won the MVP, he was so locked in, trying on the defensive end. The Rockets are following his lead. They're locked in. They win 65 games. They come up short, but then something's missing the next season. The whole vibe is off. Now he's beefing with Chris Paul. Like, it's just not the same. The year in and out, it was like for 1 year, everything came together and he locked in and he damn near won a title. And then he's never been able to replicate that start to finish effort and focus that he had in that specific year. That's, you know, one side of the spectrum. And then you've got like guys like Tom Brady on the other side of the spectrum where it's like, dude, you've won 7 Super Bowls. You're unassailably the best quarterback to ever play the game of football, probably the best football player of all time. Why are you still trying to win? Like, why are you still trying to play? But it's really that simple. He wants 8, you know, like once he gets 8, he'll probably want to come back to get 9, and it'll take some combination of his body failing him and his wife yelling at him for him to finally and inevitably hang things up. Like, that's the spectrum there. And, you know, your all-time greats, your LeBrons, your Steph Currys, your Warriors, your Spurs, they're on the far side. They're on the Tom Brady side of that spectrum. They are psychotically competitive, and you'll always see stories and anecdotes that kind of lend credence to that idea. But that's why they're not satisfied with number 4, and that's why they're going to keep coming back. Now, as far as the basketball goes, you know, when someone asks me, do I think the Warriors can win 5 or do I think the Warriors can win 6? Like, so much of it just comes down to luck. Same thing goes for LeBron if in his pursuit of 5 and 6. I'm not worried about LeBron trying hard next season. I'm not worried about Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green being locked in. Those guys are all going to be locked in, but things got to break your way. Things got to break your way with the roster. The Warriors lost 2 key rotational players in Otto Porter Jr. and in Gary Payton II, right? So, it's important for Moses Moody and Dante DiVincenzo to kind of slide into those roles in order to fill those roles, right? Health is a big part of it. The Warriors had horrible health luck there for basically 2.5 seasons, right? But things kind of all broke right. Steph got healthy just in time for the playoffs. Draymond got healthy really just before the playoffs. Klay Thompson was kind of getting his legs underneath him right around that time, and it all just kind of broke right for them. And you can also see it go the other way, right? The Bucks, they're cruising along. Everything looks great. They look like a team that absolutely could repeat and win another championship. And Chris Middleton goes down. And next thing you know, they're completely overmatched in a series against the Celtics that somehow, on the strength of Giannis's unbelievable, untamable greatness, they dragged it out to 7 games. But the point is, you got to be lucky along the way, too. So many things have to go your way. So the question of whether or not the Warriors are going to win 5 or 6 titles or just stay at 4 is will everybody stay healthy? Or, also the things like what happened with Kevin Durant in 2017, that can derail a championship opportunity, right? The Cavs were probably thinking, hey, we're repeating in 2017. We like our chances. We're bringing everybody back. Then we have Kyle Korver now. Kevin Love's going to play better because he's not going to be concussed. LeBron's actually getting better in 2017 and 2018. But it's here comes the Kevin Durant move, and now it's window over. No one's beating that team, right? So there's all these factors that are fluid in these situations, and so many things have to go your way to win a championship that the reality is it's not really 100% under their control. They've got to be lucky along the way as well. But here's the reality. I have them as the favorite going into next season because I don't see any reason to believe that they won't be right there back in the mix next year. And if I'm picking between Steph Curry, since LeBron James is basically out of he's out of contention right now, unless the Lakers work a miracle here over the course of the next couple months. If I'm picking against Steph Curry against Giannis, or picking with Steph Curry against a Kevin Durant or a Nikola Jokic or a Kawhi Leonard, I just trust him more. I trust Steve Kerr more. I trust Draymond Green more. I trust them more. So, yeah, if all things break right, I absolutely think the Warriors can win 5 or 6 titles. But it's just not as simple as going out and doing it. You need things to break your way. Let's move on to the Suns. So, Monty Williams signs a contract extension. He's staying with them as a head coach. We were wondering whether or not they were going to end up going after KD. They did not. They obviously made some offers, but they didn't make an offer that was legitimately interesting to the Nets. DeAndre Ayton goes out, signs a offer sheet with the Indiana Pacers. He ends up getting signed, or the Suns end up matching the offer. Like I told you guys, I found that whole situation to be really strange. I didn't understand if your goal all along was to keep Ayton at something close to the max, then why run the risk of all the emotional baggage of making your player feel unwanted, essentially, as part of the process. I didn't get all that, but either way, it looks like as a result of that, he can't be traded until a significant chunk into the season, and he has a trade veto power for 1 calendar year. So Ayton's not getting traded. Mikal Bridges is not enough to get KD, so the Suns are probably not getting KD unless some miracle breaks for them here in the next couple of weeks, right? So it looks like it's going to be largely the same team. Now, in these types of situations, it all comes down to whether or not you look at your team and their outcome in the last season as something that was bad luck, or if you read the reality of what happened on the court. You could, as a Suns fan, look at it as bad luck. Like, man, Devin Booker, he went cold there towards the end of that series. He had a hamstring issue in the first round. So, maybe he wasn't 100% physically. They probably had some conversations behind the scene. Devin Booker probably went up, to their front office and was like, hey, just so you guys know, I wasn't healthy. He probably said something like that. Chris Paul had a quad injury. Looked like literally was incredibly dominant through 8 playoff games, if I remember correctly, and then was a horrific shell of himself. So Chris Paul can say, hey, I was hurt. You can look at it like, hey, DeAndre Ayton's going to get better. Mikal Bridges is going to get better. Cam Johnson's going to get better. You can look at it from a very optimistic light, or you can look at the reality of the basketball. And the reality of the basketball for the Suns is they damn near lost to the Lakers 2 years ago, and fortunately Anthony Davis went down with injury, and they were able to close that series out in 6 games. Okay? Then they beat the Denver Nuggets without Jamal Murray. Okay? Then they got dragged to 6 by the LA Clippers without Kawhi Leonard. And then they lost 4 consecutive games in the NBA Finals to lose to the Milwaukee Bucks and Giannis. And in the first 2 games, they won, but you could argue that Giannis was freshly back from having his knee inverted and probably wasn't close to 100%. Then we come into this season, and they get dragged to 6 games by the New Orleans Pelicans. Mind you, they had some injuries in that series. And then they lose to the Dallas Mavericks. Now, this was not them losing to the Warriors. This was not them losing to a juggernaut. They lost to a dark horse title team that was significantly, the Dallas Mavericks had significantly less talent than the Phoenix Suns. But they lost, largely on the strength of Luka's greatness. All last season, I told you guys, I thought the Phoenix Suns were the most talented team in basketball. From the top down. But they were missing that alpha dog talent. And I thought that this season would be a great indicator of whether or not they were real or fake. Frauds or real legitimate title contenders. Because, in this particular case, Chris Paul is one of the best playmakers in the league, right? And Devin Booker is a fantastic 3-level scorer. So in theory, the two of them can kind of combine and masquerade as a superstar, right? But then they ran into a real superstar in Luka Doncic, who did not have the level of surrounding talent that they did, and they looked completely and utterly overmatched, helpless, lying on the ground as Luka stomped them in the ground. That's what happened. And so, to me, if I was looking at that situation as the general manager, and I was trying to decide whether or not, bad luck was the reason for our outcomes, or a fundamental flaw in team construction, meaning the lack of alpha dog superstar was the problem, I'm looking at option number 2 there. And so if they run it back, which it looks like they're going to, that's what I would expect. I would expect more of the same. Dominant regular season engine. Monty Williams, to his credit, the reason why he's getting an extension, if you watch that team, they are extremely well coached. Their offense is a machine. High pick and roll. Their floor spacing is excellent. They put their backside players like Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson in great position to capitalize on the defensive attention thrown to the Paul Ayton pick and roll, to the Booker Ayton dribble handoffs, and everything that they do. They're just extremely well coached, and obviously they're a great defensive team as well. So they're going to be a great regular season team. They're going to win a shit ton of games, and then they're going to end up running into one of the many superstars in the Western Conference. Hey, guess what? You've got to go through LeBron, Steph, Kawhi, Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic. You're going to run into potentially 5 opponents. Obviously, you're not going to play all 5 of them, but one of 5 opponents, 2 of 5 opponents, 3 of 5 opponents that will have by far the best player on the floor in that series. And so I would hope that at a certain point, whoever's, at this point, James Jones needs to just kind of read the writing on the wall and understand that he doesn't have enough talent. He doesn't have that big piece that he needs to get this done. And it's time to start looking elsewhere. All right, a couple of quick hitters before we get out of here. So The Volume posted a social media post the other day where they put LeBron and Kobe, MJ and KD, Shaq and Tim Duncan all in a photo and said, which one would you bench? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think it's super cut and dry. You're benching Tim Duncan. You guys know I prefer perimeter players and spaced out basketball. So obviously I'm going to go with KD, Kobe, LeBron, and MJ. And then for the center position, Tim Duncan has a better career resume. He was dominant for longer, but Shaq was better at his absolute peak. That just goes without saying. It kind of reminds me of the Steph thing. I have the utmost respect for Tim Duncan. He was never really the best player in the league, but he was always up there in that conversation, and he was such a good leader, and he was so coachable that he was kind of the ultimate foundational piece for a dynastic franchise. So it's not a slight against Tim Duncan. I have the utmost respect for him, but Shaq was a better player at his peak. You just got to slot him into that role. But I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are, so put that in the YouTube comments. Before we get out of here, like I said, when we get into these off seasons, there's a certain amount of filler. There's a certain amount of drama. I don't like getting on here and talking about Russell Westbrook every day. I actually hate it. It's just what we have to do. as part of the job, and because he's in the news. It's just the reality, right? Like, but the basketball is always what I love the most. And I want to take time in each show to dive into some sort of basketball concept. And so here at the end, I want to talk about 5-out basketball, which is something I preach all the time in the show, is something that I personally advocate for. Now, at the end of the day, it's about personnel. You have to run what fits best for your team. If you consistently have to have a player on the floor that can't shoot or dribble, you can't run 5-out basketball, so you're limited in what you can do there. But at the end of the day, if I have the correct personnel, I've always preferred 5-out basketball as a core offensive motion. And I wanted to take a couple of minutes to kind of break down why that is. So first of all, what is 5-out basketball? It is the motion offense you run when all of your actions are finished. So offense is like a progression. The first progression is try to score the basketball in transition. You get a stop, you get a rebound, you run like hell to the front of the rim and try to dunk it or get a layup until someone stops you. If someone stops you there, you might run what's called a secondary break, or like a semi-transition play. Essentially, it's an action that you run as part of transition. It might be the guards interchanging. It might be your point guard doing a dribble pitch back to the big man trailing the floor for a three. It might be a quick pin down or a quick double screen, something along those lines. But it's like a brief action that you run as part of the transition sequence. If that fails, you might run your actual play that you call, right? But if there's a play that you call, there's a couple steps to it, but you reach the end of it. Like, for instance, the high school kids that I coach, we run a play called shuffle. In shuffle, you have two bigs at the two elbows, and you have two guards on the wing. It's like a 4-high offense, right? And there's a guy making the entry, the guard making the entry up top. And you enter the ball to the high post, and there's like a flex cut off of the elbow where you try to hit the guy cutting to the basket. And then after that, it flows into a couple of like double pin downs for shooters coming off. But if those don't work, the play's over. And so what do? You know, like some coaches might have you run another play, but every coach I played for and every coach that I know of, typically you flow out of the play into your core motion offense. It doesn't have a step-by-step instruction. It's more of like a concept, right? It's like spacing principles. It's where you're supposed to stand on the floor and just some basic rules, but there's usually a lot of freedom to do what you want within that. So you design that based on your talent and what fits your team. I played on 3 different teams in college, and our core motion offense was different for each team based on personnel, right? My second year in JUCO, we ran a 3-in, 2-out motion offense because we were primarily a post-up team that had really good post players. And the post players would cross-screen for each other, and then the third post player would set a pin down for one of them to come up to the top of the key. It was kind of like a triangle, essentially. Not the triangle offense, but a triangle of post players. And you're essentially running high-low. You're trying to enter the ball to the high post so that you can make a post entry down underneath the basket. That's just what we did for the personnel that we had there. My last year in college, we ran 3-out, 2-in. Once again, because we had really good post players. And so it was kind of like a incessant set of screen and rolls where, you know, the one big would run up to set the screen while the other screen would go to the opposite block to sit in the dunker spot. And if that didn't work, then the bigs would rotate and the other big would come up to set the screen and the other guy would go to the other dunker spot, right? Like, it's just kind of a flowing run of pick and rolls. That's what we did. My high school team, we run 5-out. And again, it's not a play. Anything can happen in 5-out. It's just spacing principles. With our high school team, there's a guy at the top of the key, guy on both wings, guy in both corners, which is the way 5-out exists in every level of basketball because there's just not enough room on the floor to stand anywhere else. But from there, it's pretty much you can do whatever you want. The guy who has the basketball can attack the basket, try to get to the rim. The guy can do a dribble handoff, like dribble to the next guy and pitch it to him and try to hit his man, right? You can pass and screen away. You can call for a ball screen. You can look for the ball and cut hard and try to get open as a cutter. You can do literally anything. But as players are moving around the floor, you're always rotating and filling in spaces. So if you're at the top of the key and you pass to the right wing and you cut through, the guy at the right wing needs to fill to the top and the guy out of the corner needs to fill to the wing so the guy who's cutting can fill to the corner. So you're always like, it's kind of like pieces sliding around on the court. And everyone kind of knows their core spaces where they're supposed to be. But outside of that, you just play basketball. We always tell our kids, just play basketball. These are just some rules that you have in place to help you know where you're supposed to stand on the floor. That's all that 5-out basketball is. But there are a couple of key reasons why I believe in it so much. Now, for starters, we'll start with what the detractors will say. In order to run 5-out basketball, you need to have 5 players that are comfortable playing on the perimeter. That means they have to be able to pass, dribble, and shoot. Okay? So you just can't play 5-out basketball if you have a traditional center on the floor that can't move his feet, that can't pass the basketball, that can't put the basketball on the floor, and that can't shoot. It just won't work. I mean, if you had DeAndre Jordan stand in the weak side corner, I mean, no one's going to guard him, right? So as a result, when you have 5 perimeter players, sometimes you're limited in defensive ability. Sometimes you're limited in rebounding. For example, when the Dallas Mavericks went away from Dwight Powell and went to Maxi Kleber, he was much better in their 5-out offense because of his ability to shoot and put the basketball on the floor, but he's not the level of defensive player that Dwight Powell is, right? He's not the level of rebounder that Dwight Powell is. He's not the physical presence and the athlete that Dwight Powell is, right? So there's a trade-off in any type of concept of offense, but there's a reason why I believe in 5-out. So let's say as a starting point that I'm sacrificing a great defensive big man, okay? I'm ditching a defensive big man. I'm bringing in a smaller, more finesse big to play my 5-out offense. So I'm losing something on the defensive end and I'm losing something on the glass. But here's what I'm gaining. Now, the simple answer is spacing. So if I have a guy standing in the dunker spot, the defensive player can play 2 places at once. He can protect the rim while also guarding his man in the dunker spot. But if he's in the weak side corner and there's nobody in the dunker spot, if I beat my man off the dribble, now that helper isn't coming from the block, he's coming from his man on the weak side corner. He has to cover so much more ground. If I'm protecting the rim and I'm guarding a post player, I can be in 2 places at once. If I'm guarding the man in the weak side corner, I have to abandon my man to come help at the rim. Now the defense is in rotation. That's how the basic spacing concept works. But there's one last reason why I wanted to make this point. I believe that the best way to win basketball games is to have a superstar or an all-world talent who's better than everybody else on the floor or as good as the other team's best player, but he's comfortable and he's confident in playing his best basketball. Basketball is a rhythm sport. Confidence and belief in your ability is a huge factor in the result. Think of like when you see Reggie Jackson really in a groove and he's high stepping down the floor, kicking his legs, you know he's going to play well because up here, he's fiercely confident. What allows a player to be fiercely confident? Playing his best basketball. To play his best basketball, you want him to feel comfortable on offense. You want him to have spacing so that he feels unguardable, so that he can ride that confidence wave throughout the game. If you play congested basketball, you're going to have nights where it's like, man, all I'm getting to is my pull-up jump shot, and it's just not falling. And I don't have the space to get into the rim. So I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel good about the way I'm playing. I don't feel confident. And so even if you are getting better defense, even if you are getting better rebounding out of the role players that are clunking things up around the rim, your star is not feeling good. I want Luka to be stomping the Phoenix Suns into the ground in Game 7. Even though they're losing things in the physicality areas of the game with Maxi Kleber, Luka Doncic was peaking in that series with his confidence, his feel, and his strangling of the game. And as a result, he was able to utterly demolish the Phoenix Suns. So for me, there's always a trade-off with every style, and you can't run a style unless you have the personnel to run it. But if I have the personnel to run 5-out basketball, I will always favor that. Because whatever I lose in rebounding and whatever I lose in defensive personnel, I make up for in offensive comfort, which is going to lead to my star feeling the best about himself, which is going to be what allows him to control the game, especially at the late part of the game when it's closing time, when you have to create and make tough shots. I want my star feeling comfortable. I want my best player feeling comfortable. So again, there's all these different ways to do it. It always should be catered towards your personnel. But for me personally, if you have the personnel, I think 5-out basketball is the best core offensive philosophy to win basketball games with the modern iteration of basketball that we see around the world right now. All right, guys, that is all I have for today. I will keep you posted on my Twitter feed. Again, follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys can see show announcements and things along those lines. I will keep you posted on my Twitter feed about when the next show is. As always, I appreciate your support. I'm getting excited about eventually getting home and getting back into my studio, but I will probably give you guys another show or two on the cruise as well. I appreciate you guys rocking with me, and I'll see you next time.